there's been a whole series of events that have happened. There's a lot of messaging today about the Senate potentially picking up this thing, that they are interviewing all the people from the Nimitz story, and it appears the Intelligence Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and the Armed Services Committee are somehow involved here. And my impression is that even if they do something, they're really not going to discover much more than to sort of establish that this isn't our stuff. I'm really not very hopeful that they're going to suddenly say there's ETs here or anything like that. They may look at it as sort of a threat, because that's the whole thing, is that in order to get the money, you have to sort of present it as a threat in order to get intelligence or appropriations or armed services to look at it. But that's something, some people may have some information they want to add. There's been a lot of stuff on the internet today. And the other night, Eric Davis came on, talked about, he was on for 2 hours on Coast to Coast, and he talked about the fact that there was a crash saucer program that was put into hibernation in 1989, that they were not able to back engineer anything. And so that may be something people want to go, because a lot of people believe that they do have it. And anything you want to bring up, just bring up the subject, and I'm sure someone will step in, and we'll get it going. Just to be, and one more thing is to try to keep the comments sort of down to 5 minutes, so we don't sort of get carried away with somebody talking, endlessly, and to be sort of, respectful of other people that are here. So that's it. So I'm going to move it over to Alien Protocol, who's going to run it. He helped run it last time, and he may have something he wants to discuss. So let's start. Oh, you're muted.
Desta, did you get my information? Okay, thank you.
Hey gang, it's nice to see and not see some of you. Is there any topic that's burning right now for you guys? I know the Space Force is a big deal to people, this appropriation. You just heard about Eric Davis. I know also the pilot of the Nimitz was going around. He's mentioned that openly. Does anyone have any thoughts or insights they want to dive right into? Okay, well,
it's hard to hear you.
It's hard to hear?
Well,
can you guys hear me? Better?
A little better.
Yeah, you're not coming through very loud. You're coming through clear, but not loud. Okay, try again, AP. Now you're frozen up. Maybe someone...
Can you hear me? It's Kirk.
I can hear you, Kirk. Anything you want to discuss?
Nothing directly right now. I might throw in a little business thing I had going for experiencers later that I think Maureen sent you a email about.
Oh, well, let's get into that then. Let's start with that, because that's my big thing is experiencers.
Okay. Well, a couple years ago, I got involved with some experiencers. I ended up going to Experiencers Speak up in Maine.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, it felt like I was in a family. And through the last couple of years, just listening to you and doing research like the Roper poll that Bud Hopkins started, and counting up all the different Facebook groups there is for experiencers and abductees, contactees, starseeds. I just saw this gigantic population of people that have stories that you can't really relate to anybody outside of our world, without them thinking you're nuts. And I've heard of, a lot of complications in relationships about this. One person's going through these events, the other person
Go ahead. You're still there?
In January, I guess you could call it a download.
Okay.
I thought an experiencer site for singles, so they don't have to worry about the other person not jiving with their, individual experiencer story. To group all these people together in a community where they don't have to worry about people believing their story, I think was a goal, something doable, something I could put together and actually bring people together. Of course, with the ultimate goal of love, two people finding each other. I started planning it out. I got a hold of a web designer here locally. Got a down payment together, and we started it off. It's almost complete now. And the really funny part of the story, I think, is I'm on disability. I have kidney failure, and I'm all beat up. The state has funding for people with business plans that are on public assistance, and the goal is to get them off of public assistance.
Yep.
So I have the state of Vermont paying for an experiencer single site.
Wow. Good for you.
And now and the key, I think, is the way I'm marketing it is it's just through people's private groups that are on Facebook right now. The Secret Portals site, different ones that are restricted. They're not open to the public because I'm trying to be discreet and just market it through friends right now, and then friends through friends, and so on. And at some point, possibly start maybe on KGAR putting up a few commercials for it. But I have. I'm getting a base of 72 people on there for free. So, a lot of single sites like to make fake profiles. And as soon as you join them, before you pay, you're getting all these emails from these fake profiles saying, I'm interested. And I'm being very honest. I'm starting off, from zero. Now I have 20 people on the site set up, and I just kind of started doing the marketing push for it 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to get 72, then start with a monthly membership of $11.11.
Good one.
And I just getting more and more friends and trying to pass the word around more and more. And I think just having this as a statement to the public that it's not a couple individuals that are alien abductees or contactees. It's we're a community. We are a community enough to enable an experiencer single site to operate. And I think that message of community that I'm trying to send out with the site was that was kind of a tag-on goal after I started working with the idea.
Wow. Well, I'm willing to help you promote it because I realize what you're talking about. The group I started here in Winnipeg a couple of years ago, we called it Experiences Anonymous because there is that sort of component that people are ostracized, and there's actually a couple of books. If you've read Sherry Wild's book or the book we helped publish, Nancy Tremaine's book, you'll see that there's people who aren't even allowed to see their grandchildren. And
yeah, I know Nancy. Yep.
Yeah, and as you know, we've got this guy from Hollywood. He has a real big problem because he's, as I've mentioned, he has two of his family members are on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, very, very famous, and he's getting some backlash from his family as well. I think it's more to protect them. It's not so much they're worried about him and his sanity. It's more they're worried about themselves being exposed in this whole story. So it is a tough problem. And I even say to people from time to time that that's almost a pattern, that you don't really get any support from your friend and relatives. That's almost a standard pattern.
Right. One of my close friends has gone through that, and with his ex-wife, and but he just got introduced to an experiencer, a woman that's an experiencer, and they're having a love relationship for the ages, I would say.
Well, you might want to talk to Suzanne Chancellor, who used to have a podcast for experiencers. She is one of the people that believes she was even set up by the intelligence behind the phenomena, that they actually set her up with her present husband. So you get that kind of story as well.
Yeah, there's stories of people meeting on board and then meeting in real life after. And, that would be really special if, if a few couples would end up doing that.
Yeah.
Let's see, there is, this was actually on TV. I'm not sure how long ago I saw a video of the show, and a younger, probably in her 20s, female experiencer from America was on board and remembers meeting a male about her age with kind of a European accent. And in this TV show, she ends up moving to London, just not knowing anything if where he is or if he's in London. She just goes to London. TV show follows her for a little bit, and then she ends up moving back, but they have an epilogue on the show where she actually found this person, and he was in Wales, and she ended up moving back over, and she's with the person that she met on board. I think that's pretty neat.
Wow. Have you got a website? Have you got a website address or something that we can sort of push around? Or
I do. I can send it to Desta if you want.
Yeah, or you can send it to the group, and Desta will do what we can to promote, because we have some ability to promote with the radio show and with the various things we do. Or we may even do an interview with you and put it on Zoom, which we'll get 4,000 or 5,000 hits. A lot of people see it, and you may get some feedback from that.
Oh, bless you, man. That is great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Anything you can do to help. It's a tough life. That's why I always see the experiences as sort of special people. That it's not exactly the easiest life. You could have a lot easier lives, but it's almost like you're down the rabbit hole you can't get out, and so you have to do what you can with what you got. Yeah,
it makes it tough to talk to normal people at parties.
Yeah. Well, Grant and Kurt, I was wondering how you react to Joe Jordan's work. He's calling the UFO abduction thing the unholy communion. In other words, he's very, very negative about it. I guess you're aware of that. You are aware of these people.
Yeah, it's funny because there's so many healers involved in the experiencer groups. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I was just wondering what you thought of that. Your general attitude is that this is supposed to be a positive experience, and yet a lot of abductees are having horrible experiences.
Yeah, well, what I would say to it is, if you look at the Free Foundation survey, there's only 9% of them that believe it's evil. And usually once a person will start in fear, and once they get a regression or they start to understand what's going on, I think a lot of times we'll move away from that. It will have some repercussions, and that's where we come to this whole thing about the Senate Appropriations Committee and Intelligence Committee, what they're going to do when they confirm this thing. Because basically, I have a number of experiencers who will say to me, they're dealing with positive beings, but there are negative beings out there. And so if you get, say, the Armed Services Committee says, okay, this is for real, and we have to stop these objects from entering the United States airspace or whatever, even if you've got 1%, say the belief that there's 1% of these that are bad news, these UFOs, you're still going to be shooting everything down, because how do you know whether it's one of the good ones or the bad ones? So that's my scary sort of view of the confirmation of this thing by the Senate, is they're going to go down the route that we need to stop this. This could be a threat, and where do you go?
There's very few
How the hell
lobbyists.
are they going to stop it?
There's not a lot of lobbyists in Congress right now for peace. And everyone has some vested interest in portraying it as a threat. And they just had that jet fighter pilot talk about how the Tic Tac shut off their systems, and they used active jamming. And he used the example of active jamming as this being aggressive stance. But who locked on their weapon system on who first? I would consider that a clearly defensive stance, and in fact, a very measured response. So I think these people, though, all have vested interest in promoting it as a threat, even to the stars and other organizations that I, have more respect for. There's very few lobbyists and people who can profit off of the peaceful ETs as far as the government's concerned. So it's a very frightening situation, frankly, because they're here trying to warn us. Obviously, they're making their presence known on purpose. They're allowing themselves to be vulnerable by being seen and all these different things when they obviously have the capability not to be seen. I'd love to hear what, Giorgio, you think about some of this stuff.
I'd like to add a few points. Joe Burks, I'm an experienced, and one of the interesting things we discovered back in the 1990s, and I had a contact team in Los Angeles. We had 3 physicians on the team, and all from the same medical group, and we all were experiencers. And one of my colleagues, who I'll refer to as Dr. Daniel, that's not his real name, he's still working. His wife is retired from medicine. She was on the team. She prefers we not use the real name until they both retire from medicine. And he was allowed to do a survey of medical workers, physicians, and patients in his practice. And he had a very large practice. And he, at the end of his interview with them for medical purpose, he would say, I have this interest in UFOs. I'd like to ask you a few questions about any sightings. And what he found was 10% of this, not random, but certainly broad group of individuals, doctors, and almost all of them were, by the way, his patients too. He had, in the end, over 2,000 people who were interviewed, and 10% of them had sightings. And he was a private pilot and an experienced sky watcher, so he was able to determine what was a bona fide sighting versus the Goodyear blimp or planet Venus. 10% had sightings. 5% were not just lights in the sky, but were structured objects. 1% of this population, and when he got to 1,300, there was about 25 people, and actually interactions with beings. Although some of them thought they were angelic in nature, they could have been ET. So this is a very common phenomena. If medical doctors were addressing a syndrome that affected 10% of the population, there'd be a lot of medical people working on it. And but another point that came out of the survey was the question that you're dealing with, and that is the extreme levels of denial. One of his patients was an Armenian woman, and at the end of his interview, the patient's son was translating, and he asked for permission to do the survey, and she said yes. And through the translator, she started describing in Armenian a sighting she had while they lived in Turkey some 25 years before. This is in the 1970s. And after a while, the translator stopped translating and just started getting very agitated and talking to his mother about what happened. Apparently, he had seen the same object at the same time. Neither of them had shared with one another. Okay, so this is like omerta. In the mob, the omerta is the oath you take. If you reveal mob activities to the authorities, you will be killed. So we have a kind of system of control we've created on this planet, where this is so threatening that people can't even discuss it within their own family, even when they have a sighting. So I wanted to point out that it's very common, that the level of denial is ferocious. And one other point I'd like to make is that if you've ever seen the movie Spartacus, 1964, Kirk Douglas is in it, great movie. At the end, the slave army is defeated. And the Romans make a deal with the remaining slaves that are alive, that if you give up Spartacus, we won't crucify you. So when that's understood, Kirk Douglas, who's playing Spartacus, and Tony Curtis, the famous actor who played his assistant, and one other slave commander stand up together and they say, "I am Spartacus." They're giving themselves up to spare their comrades. And then, in the final scene is, of course, very dramatic, where the entire slave army stands up, well, except for the ones who were badly wounded. They had to be picked up by their comrades. And they're all shouting, "We're Spartacus." So this is an incredibly common issue. And I believe that truly 10% of the population has had a bona fide sighting. And that one day, we are going to start waking up collectively to the large numbers of people who are experiencers. I believe that every person who has a bona fide UFO sighting has a consciousness link with the phenomena. And that means if you've got a consciousness link, then you are a contactee. And at some time in the future, you might start remembering prior contacts, which is part of the pattern. 10, 20, 50 years later, all of a sudden, you're remembering dreams. You talk to your relatives. "Oh yeah, your brother said we had sightings. You had forgotten them." So this collective denial is facilitated by lack of memory that the UFO intelligence controls. I believe in the long run, millions of people are going to accept this as readily as the slaves accepted the fact that they were slaves, but they were in struggle against a tyrannical system. And I think the analogies are there for us to ponder. And I want to thank you for your work. It's great. When I started doing contact work, I took an oath to myself that I wasn't going to do this as kind of dating service. I was going to meet a lot of people, and some of them are going to be female, but I'm not going to I'm married. I got my life. But I said I was not going to be involved in a mating service. But obviously, that doesn't cover all bases. And I really commend you for the novel idea that you brought.
Oh, thank you.
Notes to self. UFO dating service.
By the way, Joseph, thank you for sharing that. I was just watching the new Spartacus series, which they made. It's based on the movie, but I totally understand what you were talking about. And sorry to just jump in here. I was at the Alien Expo a couple days ago with Grant, and had the privilege to shake his hand and introduce myself. And my mom's boss was one of the presenters at the conference. His name is Mike Dandy, and he presented an anti-gravidic lifter. And what's interesting about this guy is my mom's a project manager for his software company that writes the software for utilities here in Ontario, Canada. And in his basement, working with the utility company and with his education background, he was able to create a electrogravitic lifter, which he presented at the conference. So it's a triangle that hovers, and he beams a bunch of energy at it, 100,000 volts. But what's interesting is it's not really, although I'll get into that later, the TR-3. He basically demonstrates proof of concept for the TR-3. But it's the batteries. It's not like it's plugged into the wall. It's the batteries that he uses. They're compressed quartz crystals that use a piezoelectric principle of power. So it's compressed quartz crystals in these copper tubes. And so he, Mike, demonstrated proof of concept with Home Depot parts, basically a TR-3. And anyway, so sorry to just jump in there, but this is the first time I've done one of these. I have done interviews before. I think Kevin Estrella might be on here. I've done interviews with him on Aquarian Radio. I'm an experiencer, and I'm from Ontario, Canada. And I don't want to take up too much time, so I'm just going to do a brief overview, and then I'd like to listen to what you guys have to say. In 2008, I was bicycling in Cambridge on the Blair Trail, and a white TR-3 hovered over me as I was bicycling. And so I got off my bike and I looked up, and it was right over top of me, like just a couple 100 feet off the ground, just above the treetops. And I walked under this thing for 5 minutes in broad daylight. And I knew it was man-made because I could see paneling on it. And it was a white triangle, just like walking pace, moving above me. And so I followed it for 5 minutes, and then the trail opened up into a field. And then I got hit with this wave of nausea and like vertigo, and I had to like sit down and put my head between my legs. And it was lifting up during that time. And I would later find out that's actually when they picked me up and brought me back. And I've done some interviews with Denny Hunt and Grant Cameron. Got to meet Denny in person in California, and they did an in-person interview. And I've also gotten to meet Tony Rodriguez, who did a 20 and back with a different faction, the Fourth Reich faction. And he helped me to develop a timeline, because at that point, when I met with Tony, I didn't really quite understand what happened to me. And he kind of educated me on this whole concept of a 20 and back, where they'll pick you up, and then during like a 5 or 10-minute window, they'll put you back. And you can be gone for 20 years. They can bring you into the past, they can bring you into a probable future. This is the time travel technology that they have. I don't know if you guys, anyone listening to this is familiar with Tony Rodriguez, but he was interviewed by Michael Salla, and he talks about his 20 and back. And I was lucky enough that after I did my first interview with Denny, Tony reached out to me and said, we should really have a conversation. So I got to meet him in person last June, and he kind of educated me on this whole concept of a 20 and back. And up until that point, I wasn't really sure what, I knew they had taken me, but I wasn't sure exactly what I was involved with. Because it kind of does, this is where the experiencer thing happens. It comes back in like vivid dreams, flashbacks, like basically nightmares or night terrors at night. You have these secret space program type dreams. And they're so elaborate and detailed as well, that you kind of know the reason why it freaks you out is because it's not just your imagination, because it's beyond like your own creativity, to be honest, or at least for me, like what I was experiencing was beyond my creativity. I always knew I had that experience in 2008. And then the craft came back in 2015. I was meditating late at night. It was 3:45 in the morning. And I look out into my backyard, and it just lights up. And then the white triangle comes over the house again, and it cruises over at 3:45. And I'm standing there, and I'm really freaked out. And then it comes back at exactly 4 a.m., like the same way, but backwards. And so that was like another huge sighting of mine. And then I did a higher self channeling session with a psychic named Carl Mollison. And we made that public on Denny Hunt's channel as well. And he said I was re-abducted at that point, but I wasn't conscious of it. I just remembered the craft showing up, and then I remember it leaving. Just like in 2008, I walked underneath it, and then that's when it showed up. And then when it was lifting up, when I was in the field, that was when it was leaving, and I got hit with the nausea. And so I've been abducted a couple times, and the flashbacks have come back. But where it gets really interesting, and I'm gonna, sorry, it's supposed to be a brief overview. I'm gonna end this in a minute. But what it gets really interesting is because I've had shared recalls with other experiencers, like Anthony Zender, and him and I did a round table. And he's an ex-Marine and MMA fighter. And we had a shared recall in December of being on the TR-3, tracking a submarine using remote viewing. And so we did an interview about that. And that's where it gets really interesting, is when if you're keeping track of your timeline in a dream journal, you start having shared experiences with other experiencers. And if you're able to contact them the next day, the next thing you know, you can do kind of a comparison where you're like, I dreamt this, and with me and Anthony, we had the exact same dream the night before. So it's like, what are the odds of that? So anyway, that's the experiencer thing, and I'll just end it there. But thank you for letting me chime in there, and I'm willing to listen to whatever you guys have to say.
Can I ask a couple questions, Kevin? Is there a link for this experiment? I saw the video was sent to me, but is there a link for this?
Do you mean the interview with Denny?
No, the demonstration that was done in Toronto. I know I got a link for it, but is it on the internet? Because it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, Mike Dandy doing the lifter experiment. Yes, I have. I took a video on my iPhone, so I have my own video, and then he has a Facebook group, and they did like a higher quality 30-second video, but I can download both, and I can absolutely email that to you, no problem.
Yeah, I've got it. I'm just wondering whether there's an open link where, say, the people attending tonight can go and watch this, because it was kind of impressive, and I know that Mike stated he didn't want to go public, and yet he went public. And I remember I was sitting beside Richard Dolan, and Richard said to him, you either go public or you don't go public. You can't do both at the same time. So I'm just wondering whether there's even if it's under an anonymous name where people can see this demonstration where this thing is sort of floating around, because it was kind of impressive.
Right. Yeah, sorry. I think it might be private video, I think, because there's the one I have that I took, and then there's one in his Facebook group, but that might just be his own video within his Facebook group, which is about 20 people. It's just people he knows. Yeah. And he is trying to keep a low profile because it's not actually the lifter, even though that's the cool part, seeing a metal triangle floating around. It's actually the batteries that could get. Yeah,
describe the batteries, because that was kind of impressive. They go basically forever, right?
Well, the small ones that he has last 4 years without charging. I attended a MUFON meeting with him, and a guy from Nokia drove from Ottawa to Toronto just to see his experiment. And I talked to this Nokia guy, and he was interested in the batteries from a cell phone company standpoint. Imagine a cell phone battery that, yes, okay, they're this big. It's like a tube that lasts 4 years. But even if you were to downsize that. Imagine a battery, a disposable battery, where your cell phone lasts 6 months without charging, especially for emergencies and that. That'd be great.
And this was stuff he just got off the shelf, right?
Yeah, he built that himself. He just got this stuff from Home Depot.
Yeah, very impressive. I had discussion. The only thing we had with him was, you don't want it public, and yet you demonstrate in Toronto. So it was sort of like we were sort of hoping he would sort of go public with, this thing, because it's kind of impressive, and it does sort of, it does appear that he's got something. He's onto something.
Absolutely. He proves proof of concept, and I think he's coming to terms with going public. He just went public. Yeah. That first demonstration he did publicly was in November, and now he did the Alien Expo. So it's scary kind of going public, especially from his point of view, because it's not just an experiencer like me. Like I'm a guy with some UFO stories. Okay, that's kind of harmless at this point. But as you know, once you actually are demonstrating free energy, yes, that's where it gets real. So he's just being careful, because he's a dad, he has kids, he has little girls, so he's just being careful.
Can I ask you, does it look like this? Is it one of those ion lifters?
Yeah, an ion lifter or anti-gravidic lifter. They're hard to build. They take a lot of tweaking.
And they take a lot of energy in them. And it's pre-established science. I think, Gregory, you might be familiar with it. They have these triangle structures with little cross beams. It has to be very light balsa wood covered with aluminum foil, and they run a very high voltage through it. And they cram that energy into a capacitor, and they blast it. And apparently there's a little bit of speculation that it might be an ion wind between the upper, the positive and the negative, creating an ion wind which lifts it. Is that what you're saying as well, Kevin?
I'm not a scientist, so I don't know. You'd have to
Well,
ask Mike
from
about
what you
that.
saw.
But he has referenced ion wind as a possible like reason
Factor
for
in
why
it.
it generates lift, and why the voltage amount to the lift isn't. It actually it's exponential. Once you get a certain amount of voltage, it's not to the weight to rate, like the weight ratio to the voltage. It's exponential. So it's not equal to the voltage.
Mm-hmm.
And so that could be ionic wind, because it's almost like a sail that's has this gust, and then it just lifts up, and it can lift like 10 times the amount of weight, and exponentially onwards. You know what I mean? Like it's and that kind of proves the whole concept of the black triangles, the TR-3. I've seen little white ones, but these electrogravitic triangles that are flying around in high orbit right now, they probably use like a Serlian generator, or possibly like a cold fusion reactor. It doesn't really matter where they get the energy from. It's because it's exponential once you transfer it to the electrogravitic aspect.
Well, there's a lot of cool speculations in terms of power, propulsion, anti-gravitics, all of that stuff. If no one minds for a second, I would love to circle to Giorgio, because before we were talking a lot about experiences and experiencers, and a lot about negative experiences. And Giorgio, you have a lot of experiences. You've been with a lot of different groups. You've worked with Rama. You've seen a lot. Would you give us your perspective on, first of all, the government's trying to push the visitors as a threat, and the visitors in general?
Well, I think that it's as though we were like a chrysalis trying to become an imago. I just heard this term recently. It's like an unconscious representation of a final, the way of a being is when it's fully developed. That's the unconscious representation is an imago. And we are in a very mature stage right now, like becoming aware of what we might become, and all the different facets of the UFO community. Each of us want to promote a particular aspect, but I think that the progress will have to be when we will happen when we are able to consider what we usually dismiss in others. Oh no, the TT say, oh, they are being manipulated, or they are lying to us, or others say, oh no, the secret space program, that's not true, that's false, that's where the manipulation is. Oh, negative beings, oh, they don't exist. It depends on one faction we are more associated with, that we promote that. But unless we are willing to listen to all of us promoting the major ideas, I don't know. I don't think we are going to become that imago, like a mature, unconscious image of what we are supposed to be as human beings in the new stage. But I think that the work that you are doing with promoting the direct contact is very important, very, very important. Before Grant said that even if 1% is considered negative, that's going to still be, they are still going to try to shoot them down. But if we had a personal relationship with them, actually know who they are, and start finding a way, it would probably take many years, but finding a way to determine who each different being is. And if most are not aggressive, then maybe we can make progress. Also speaking with the congressmen and the politicians and the scientists and the military. But I think our attitude is most important. That we must first start to try to listen to each other, to listen to experiencers, those that had positive experiences, negative experiences. Talk to the TTSA people who right now are, in general, like isolating themselves from the UFO community. Try to build bridges to connect. rather than to, always see each other with suspicion. But I think that the work that you are doing and other CE5 people is crucial to try to understand who the extraterrestrials or interdimensionals, however we want to understand them, are. We need to get to know them personally. That's the key thing.
I think that's the big disclosure. And for those of you who don't know, I work with a group, we're called Advanced Protocols, and we have a project. And basically what we try and do on a regular basis is make contact and teach others how to make contact. And we have an effort to gather a bunch of experiencers together and meditators, not only at our location, but around the world, to concentrate on this one spot that we've picked. And we'll pick 5 in total. And we've brought scientific equipment. We're gathering more scientific equipment and multiple different cameras, different kinds of cameras, to capture an event with real high evidentiary value. And we're going to live stream the entire thing. And our hope and desire is exactly what Giorgio is talking about, building a relationship. A lot of contact groups go out there and they see stuff way in the distance at an orbital level, and it'll flash a couple lights and everyone will cheer, wow, and it's exciting. But as it gets closer and lower, as you have more and more experiences, it becomes a more intimate thing. And you start getting more and more in touch with yourself. It's less almost about getting in touch with them and more about getting in touch with yourself. And then ultimately what happens is you're going to have a closer and closer experience. And this is what's happening with CE5 groups around the world. We're nothing special. We're just students and learning. But that experience can get closer and closer and closer. And we hope that we're blessed with a friendship, starting an actual friendship and communicating like human beings, not with missiles or with jet fighters, but with respect. Because obviously to me and our group and many experiencers, not all feel this way, but they're here to warn us. They've made their care of the biosphere very well known. We believe that the most precious thing in the universe is data, and life forms are one of the densest forms of data. So these advanced civilizations and beings prize life forms, prize biospheres, and prize our biosphere, and are trying to let us realize how precious ours is by going to the nuclear sites to say, don't destroy your planet, by leaving ecological message after ecological message with experiencers. So that's what we want to do, is we want to help create this relationship, live stream it, and more and more groups are doing this. And it's only a matter of time before something really amazing happens. That's going to be very hard to dispute. And hopefully that amazing thing will happen again and again and again. And we'll take disclosure out of the hands of those who don't want to give it to us and give it to the people where it belongs. Because it's humanity's birthright to know about our neighbors, So
I noticed that your, let's say, attitude towards who they might be is more flexible than Stephen Greer's. I like Stephen's work very much. I was also participated in his group, had a couple of experiences, but he was very close-minded about anybody telling him that there might be a few, maybe 1% of negative beings, okay? And even though there are contactees, like in the Rama group, that promote benevolent contact with the Space Brothers, they have also been told that there are some that are not necessarily benevolent. But he was completely close-minded and got upset and angry, and you cannot tell him that. But I noticed that you are more flexible, and I think that's what we need. We need to listen to different possibilities of truth until we gradually bring them together into data fusion, and an intelligent data fusion of what might be really going on, but not dismiss offhandedly different people's opinions and knowledge.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We should all be starting with this.
Shouldn't we also be flexible with them just like we are with ourselves? We are a very diverse species. We have all kinds of people. We have so-called good and bad people and everything in between, all kinds of diverse cultures and ways of communicating. And I think if we limit them to a category, we are making a big mistake. We've got to be as open with them in the way that we communicate and how we see each other as we are with them. I think it has to be the same kind of communication, and not to see them as something separate, but as whatever they are. And I'll say, I don't know what they are. I've had experiences, but I'm not ready to say if they're extraterrestrials or interdimensional or an aspect of ourselves. But I think that they should be treated just like we should be treating each other in ways that we're not doing it right now. And if we can't communicate with each other and be open-minded with one another, we're never going to get anywhere with them.
That's great points. Great points. You know, we shouldn't fight amongst each other. We're all searchers and questers on the same thing. And in fact, the more we cooperate, the more we listen, we're only going to be broadening our own horizons. And life is short and precious. Plus, we may get information we would get no other way. So it's really, you know, don't limit yourself.
I totally agree. And let me just add that we all have a piece of the puzzle. Every one of our experiences gives us an insight, an angle into what's going on here that we can't have individually. So it's the collective is a good factor to pay attention to. Nobody should be rejected, no matter how negative or how positive, or how unearthly or how infernal it may be. Which brings me, you know, when people have some of these horrific abduction experiences, like, you know, anal exams, you know, or they're abused sexually, or they, you know, like you see with some of these groups, like with Joe Jordan, people report that Carla Turner reported in her abductees 19 items of horrific treatment by the extraterrestrials or whatever they are. And but if you look at the language that they're using, you see, if we understand their language, we'll make good progress. Because I know from my own understanding of the symbolism of things, sex in a dream means I want psychological intimacy with you. Just that simple translation changes the whole conversation about it. And anal exams, well, if you look at what's going on in the belly brain or in your intestines, you know, there's research out that shows that there is such a thing as a gut brain. And a lot of people trust their gut when they make decisions. You know, we hear about that. And this physician in New York spent his whole life studying it. And there's a lot of intestines in neurons in your intestines. And so I think the aliens are saying, if you listen to your gut brain, you can get consciousness from that too. Anyway, just a couple samples.
Hey, Gregory, what you said about the brain of the gut,
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about that. One of the books I've read is Dr. David Jubb. He talks about I think it's 40 neurons in the gut. And what happens is people, whether it's physical parasites or transdimensional astral parasites, they can actually lock in on the brain of the gut and can influence people. And that's where cravings come from. Sometimes addictions come from. It's actually transdimensional astral parasite, and they can have bad dreams as well. And there really is a brain of the gut. There's actually neurons in our stomach. And that's where that saying comes from, like, go with your gut, because it's your solar plexus, your willpower. So you kind of have to do mind over matter when you get that feeling in your gut, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of research on it. My friend over in Zurich is a Jungian analyst, and he calls it the belly brain. Like, it's another center of knowing, you know. And there's a vagus nerve that connects the belly brain to our physical brain. So there's communication going on between the two. You can have, like you were saying there, Kevin, if you're missing a certain bacteria in your gut, it can lead to depression. Your brain senses it, your upper brain senses it, your other center annoying. And they've done mouse studies where they take excrement from a mouse that doesn't have a certain kind of behavior, and they stick it in the anus of the mouse that does have a wrong behavior, and suddenly the mouse that's having the strange wrong behavior behaves normally. And so they've proven it in mice that bacteria has a direct effect on our psychological health as is perceived by our brain, our upper brain. So there's something too. When you see, when these things are communicated to people, they're so misunderstood, they're horrified. But consciousness is the agency for all transformation. Without consciousness, there is no transformation. So if these people could understand the symbolism that's going on in their material, boy, they're going to light up like a Christmas tree. They'll be so delighted, they'll be celebrating Christmas every day.
Well, the gut, you know, also symbolizes your instinctual feelings, your subconscious, and that plays a deep role in this in terms of other things that are associated, like remote viewing and other gifts of the sublime and of the subconscious. So, you know, the gut also represents that, and people utilize remote viewing where they go with their gut, not with their, you know, their left brain. They're going with their right side of their intuition. And so, you know, that has powerful meaning. And I think the more we tap into that gut and the more we explore that gut, I think the more we'll find some really strange things. There's Dr. Bernard Neppy, who is a physicist who discovered something, and mathematically he's proven it in terms of volumetrics and other things about this consciousness field that he calls the Gemmel. And we could also call that the gut, this kind of feeling that's out there that we kind of all know we can tap into. That's also the same way to CE5 and make a good contact. I think Georgia would back up the fact that this doesn't come from the top of your conscious mind. It comes from a deep part of that gut, the subconscious, contact and remote viewing and stuff. Does anyone else have any thoughts about accessing the sublime or remote viewing?
Yeah, I do. I think if you see the universe, and I know I've seen these images online and in things that I've read about how the earth, how the universe is connected. It looks like a big web. Like if you see some of these images they've done where they've enhanced them and everything, it's like, it looks like a huge web. And I think that we are all part of that, and we are all connected to that. We're first of all connected to this web right here on this planet we live on, and we're connected to every living thing, you know, people, animals, plants, everything. We're connected to them, and those in turn are connected to the universe. And what I've learned is that you've just got to learn to, the way I do it is I kind of go from spot to spot, and if I feel something or I think something or something comes to me out of the blue, I follow that trail. And I don't know how I can really explain how I do that, but it's like if you connect to this one thing, you're automatically going to connect to something else, which is going to connect to something else, and then boom, you've gone across the universe.
Right.
And I think it's something that everybody can do. It's not a gift. It's something that you have to be curious first of all, and you can't be afraid of what you think you're going to find or where it's going to lead you.
And just to expand upon that, one of the experiences I had after being picked up in the TR-3, and I had orientation at the LOC, when we were brought to Mars, we were taught remote viewing. And a lot of people ask me during this remote, because I talk about the drugs they gave us, and most people ask, was it a psychedelic? In terms of like seeing things in order to remote view. And interestingly enough, what I remember is it was entirely physical. We didn't see any hallucinations. They would give us the drugs, and you get these ripples, and then you'd have a spotter beside you, and they would have the coordinates. And sometimes they were numbers, sometimes they were letters, a color. It was on a piece, just a regular piece of paper, and you'd have these coordinates with a spotter that got you to focus on the coordinates. And And when they give you the drugs, it was entirely physical, and it was just an inner knowing, which I think is what we're talking about, the gut feeling. They were actually trying, with whatever drugs they gave us, to bring out the brain of the gut, because it's that inner knowing. And gut is in Germanic language is it's the God feeling. Your gut feeling is your God feeling, or your inner knowing, or your divine, feeling. And it's interesting how they would give us drugs not to hallucinate in an LSD acid trippy kind of like visuals. It was this inner knowing, and then they had someone over our shoulder focusing on the coordinates and asking us questions constantly, bringing us back like a spotter about the coordinates. And then it was us giving us the gut feeling, knowing, the inner knowing from the gut.
So what they're doing is like getting you to jump. They're trying to jumpstart you into consciousness, is what it sounds like they're doing.
Right, like trying to access, like you said, like that cosmic web. Exactly what you're talking about. It actually has to do with accessing the cosmic web, which has to do more with like your neurology and access at your nervous system, accessing the cosmic web, and not so much these hallucinations, visual or auditory hallucinations. No, it was like this inner feeling where they wanted you to expand upon the coordinates, but it came from an inner feeling, if that makes sense.
Right, I know, and I know what you're talking about, because it's not. I have knowing every now and then. I have all kinds of things go on with me. I mean, I'm not even. I don't even want to just go into UFOs, because I've had all kinds of strange experiences my whole life. I've talked to dead people and all that stuff. And there's certain types of knowing that come along that it's really hard to explain. Like, this is many, many years ago. This is when I was a kid. And this is just an example of what I mean by knowing. I lived in Southern California, and one night on the news, they announced that there was a little boy that had gone missing from his front yard. And the police were looking for him and all this. And like I said, I was about 12 at the time. And I remember watching the TV and saying to my family, I said, they're going to find him in his own yard. Now, I don't know where that came from, but I just knew that. And how stupid is that? They're looking all over the place for this kid, but I'm saying they're going to find him in his own yard. The next day, it turned out that this little 4-year-old boy had somehow gotten into his own backyard, and they had a swimming pool that had a cover over it. And he had gotten underneath there and gotten trapped and died. And all I remember the next day is my family was just like, they didn't even, yeah, I said, that's what I said. And my family was just stone quiet. So that was a knowing that I can't explain, but it was like, I just knew the kid was going to be found in his yard, and I can't explain it. And I've had more profound things than that, but that's just an example of what I mean, is somehow I went there and I saw him, I think. And I knew, and it was very back in the back of my head.
Yep.
That's such an interesting story.
Yep.
Hey, can I chime in here? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Hey, all. I just wanted to say that there was a study recently about gut bacteria, and that 40% of it is alien DNA that has no origin that they're familiar with, and that there's within this study talk about how the bacteria actually knows how to play on the nervous system of the stomach to get what it wants, and to actually get you to eat the things that it wants, which I thought was really interesting. But the fact that the DNA itself of 40% of the gut bacteria that everyone has in their stomach is completely foreign and alien to any known other bacteria species is fascinating and really, really wild.
Beyond that is each person has their own little biome in there too. Because one of the things they're doing now with people that have like Clostridium difficile, C. diff, is they're actually doing transplants, fecal transplants from people that have a healthy biome, and they're transplanting the bits of poop to these people to help improve their own biome in their gut.
Well, Well, it
Right.
only took us 59 minutes to get to poop and anal. So I think
Right. But it's true. It's called the inner
Hey,
tube of life.
don't make fun of it. We're making progress.
of course we are. We are making progress. Let's explore both of these things. Let's explore anal a little further. No. I wanted to talk about that connection we're all talking about, that gut connection. And we're talking about brain waves. A lot of people talk about the theta brain waves and different brainwave states that increase this connection and increase the accuracy of remote viewings and things like that. There are teas and stuff you can take that increase your theta brain waves. And there's also something called sidereal time, which is a real galactic time. It's based on when your portion of the Earth faces the galactic center, the black hole in the center of the galaxy. And there are studies that have proven 400 times more accuracy, and I can get a link and send it to anybody. And they found this out at SRI, and Joe McMoneagle is a big, obvious proponent of it and was talking about it on several videos that I've seen. And I was stunned to find out that that also increases accuracy. So there's a bunch of other things you can do to increase that gut connection. And I think it also, you know, my belief, it relates to things like Rob was talking about last week, out-of-body experiences. It connects to healing. It connects to how the UFOs can read our thoughts. So I think it's a really kind of important subject. Rob, do you have any perspectives on that gut connection?